Well, Professor, I think we are going to start, and people will join us. We are like 50 participants, so.
Should I start?
Maybe I can present you, and after this we can start. Okay.
And please don't forget to record.
Yeah.
Okay.
Record. Okay. Hi everybody. The ESLSCA Paris Business School begins its 2020-2021 conference cycle, Les Jeudis de l'ESLSCA, with a webinar presented by Professor Ali Akarca, Emeritus Professor of Economics at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Professor Akarca is a specialist in the political economy of elections and an expert in American election. His research focuses on the impact of political, economic, and social factors on voter choice and government performance. Professor Akarca presents his reading and analysis of 2020 US presidential election and their socio-economic extension in the United States and the rest of the world. If you want to interrupt, you can do it from the chat room. Don't hesitate. Professor, I think you can start.
Okay, thank you very much. Greetings, everyone. I'm going to talk about 2020 US election. You know what did change. I'm going to emphasize what didn't change. By that, I mean the conditions and the dynamics which brought Trump to power in 2016 hasn't changed much in this election. In fact, they got even strengthened. So that's what I'm going to talk. But before I do that, let me show you the most recent situation, and I'll tell you how Biden won. You know, in 2016, Hillary Clinton got 3 million more votes than Trump due to peculiarities of US election system because she didn't get enough seats in the electoral college. She did not win the election, but she got 3 million more votes, or 2.1% more than Trump. Biden doubled these. You know, he got 6 million more votes than Biden, or 3.9% more than him. Now, he did not win by convincing people who voted for Trump to vote for him this time. He won by increasing the turnout. You know, there were about 25 million more people voted in this election. The turnout was the highest in 120 years. So in 2016 election, both candidates were not very popular with their parties. There were segments they did not want to vote for them. Like among Democrats, many people did not like Clinton, but they couldn't bring themselves to vote for Trump either, so they refrained from voting. And similarly, there were Republicans who did not want to vote for Trump, but they did not like Clinton either, so they refrained. Now, I convinced many people, most of the Democrats, to vote, and they vote in droves, in particular the blacks. Now, blacks are overwhelmingly supportive of Democratic candidates, but they don't participate in the election usually. They feel like it doesn't make any difference for them, whoever wins, because they feel their conditions do not change. So Biden was able to convince them that it does, and Trump's racist actions helped him in that regard, you know, helped Biden in that regard. Now, let me point out this too. Even though Democrats won the presidency, the Republicans increased their seats in the House of Representatives by 10. So it looks like some Republicans who did not vote in the earlier election, this time they voted for their party's candidate in the congressional election, but in the presidential election, they voted for Biden. They split the ticket. So basically, that's how Biden won. And small changes in the bottom makes big changes at the top. He flipped a few states which Hillary Clinton lost by small margin. He won them by small margin. That's how it occurred. But more important is we should talk about how Trump got so much votes in 2016 and in 2020 increased them by 11 million, so that's the important part. So he's nowhere to go away, so we have to take that into consideration. So how come Trump is getting this much votes? Well, basically, Trump is a populist. How do populists operate? They divide the society into two groups. One they call real people, and the rest the others. And they visualize others as usurping the rights and privileges of the people. So they present themselves to the people, quote people, as being their sole and genuine voice and fighting the others to protect the rights of the people. Now, for that to occur, there has to be some divisions in the society. There should be some fault lines. And populists do not create them, they just exploit them. So that's what happened in this case with Trump. Now, what are the fault lines in the United States? There is rural-urban divide, there is low-income, high-income divide, there is natives and migrants divide, whites against peoples of color, and nationalists and globalists. Now, these are not mutually exclusive, of course. If you are rural, you are also low-income, white, native, so on. So Trump's people can be defined as rural, low-income, native, white, and anti-globalist. So, and he did not create these, as I said, he just exploited them. Now, this group I discussed as Trump's people has grievances. Their conditions have gone down. Now, typically in America, every generation lives better than the previous generation. However, this group that I just described you have lower income than their parents, and they have lower life expectancy than their parents. This is the first time it's happening in the United States. And Trump was one of the first ones to realize this and try to make hay out of it. Now, let me show you the rural-urban divide. Now, this is an election map in 2016 on the county basis. If you look at the state basis, you don't see the full picture. This is on a county basis. And there are about slightly more than 3,000 counties in the United States. Every state is divided into counties, okay? Now, this is 2016, but 2020, I don't have the map for that yet, but that's not very different either. Out of 3,000 plus counties, Biden flipped only 59 of them. So essentially how he won is those blue counties, he won by greater margin in those, and he got 59 extra counties, mostly in the suburbs, But of course, from this picture, you may get the idea that Trump swept the whole United States. Most of those red areas, the red counties, very few people live in them. So those blue areas are population centers. So let me show you, this shows as a special map, but if you look at the population, oops. What did I do? Hello?
Yes, I think you have to click
I lost the screen. So let me
get it back. At the bottom of your screen. Yes, we can see it.
Well, I cannot. That's what happened.
Okay, so you have to, where is your presentation?
I think it got lost. Let me get it.
Yeah, I think you have to find your PowerPoint.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
Yeah, now you see the presentation?
No, we are.
You don't?
The Zoom message, yes.
You don't see the presentation?
No. Okay, let's
So
try
what do I
again.
need to do?
Let's try again. Okay. Maybe click on the Ledge meeting. Yes.
So I don't see the share screen thing. It says you are screen sharing, but I don't.
Okay. This is the ups and downs of live broadcasting.
Yeah, let me start from scratch.
Yes.
Now do you see it?
Okay, now we see it.
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
Thank you. Well, what happened is I was trying to, it's like a video shape, so. Yeah, I want to show you this. Each bubble represents the population of the, is there a way I can, yeah. Yeah, this is what I want to show. Now, each of these bubbles, the size of the bubble represents the population of that county. And if you notice, all the big bubbles are blue. There are very few red bubbles, you know, the Republican. Most of them are small dots. That shows you the rural-urban divide. So now, similar thing exists in Europe too. So this is not our topic, but since you are participating from Europe, I thought you would be interested in seeing these pictures. The one about England, Britain, is about the Brexit vote. You know, how urban areas voted one way and the rural areas voted the other. And the one about the France is Macron-Le Pen election. You can see the blue-red divide there too. Now, let me show you yet another way. As you know, US House of Representatives has 435 members. Each member is elected from a single member district. You know, each district has one member. Now, some of those are purely rural, some are purely urban, some are half rural, half suburban, or some rural and suburban, and so on, different mixtures. So if you go from the pure rural to pure urban, you will see the number of seats won by Republicans relative to the number of seats won by Democrats decreases as you go down. And by the time you reach pure urban, all of the seats are Democrat and there is no Republican. So there is clearly an urban-rural divide. You can see that. But urban-rural divide is not just about geography, it's about income as well. Now, let me show you this. In 2000, Al Gore won 659 of those 3,000 odd counties, whereas George Bush won about 2,400. But the income of each group was, the population sizes were about equal, and so is the income, 54 to 46%. There's not a big gap. But come to 2016, Hillary Clinton won much less counties than Al Gore, and Donald Trump won much more. But look at the income distribution. 64% of the counties voted for Hillary Clinton earned 64% of the US GDP. You know, now I have preliminary results for 2020 election. Look at Biden. He won 477. These are based on 96% of the counties. 477 of the counties were won by Biden. Hillary Clinton, remember, had 472. It's about the same. But look at the percentage of GDP, 70%. It is even increased. And those who voted for Trump decreased in proportion of income. You know, so you can see it also represents an income division there. So it's not just geography. Now, if you look at how the metropolitan areas fared compared to rural areas after 2008 crisis in United States, United Kingdom, and France, you can see those people in Paris and the rest of France, or those people in California and New York and the rest, you can see a big gap with them. You know, much of the rural people haven't recovered even from 2008 crisis, you know, let alone with this corona crisis, you know, and they feel a grievance. They say, how come urban areas get help and they improved quite a bit and we are still stagnating? So there is a grievance factor. Now, let me look at historical perspective. You know, if you look at historical perspective, the Gini coefficient as high as about a century ago, you know, income inequality is as high as 90 years ago. And it's very important, about a century ago, that's when the populist movements started, you know. Actually, I don't know whether you know this, the term populist, its origin goes back to a party formed in 1892 in the United States and lasted till 1908. The party's name was People's Party, but among media and public, it was referred to as Populist Party. So, and the Populist Party, the term was used by historians to refer to that particular party until mid-50s. But after mid-50s, it started being used by social scientists to define any anti-elite, anti-establishment movement. So it became a term. But origins is about a century ago, or more than slightly more than a century ago, when income inequality was at its highest level. And not only that, the demographics changed too. There was a lot of immigrants arrived at that time. I'm going to show you that. It's a combustible feature, you know, when you combine income inequality with population composition changing, lots of immigrants coming and so on, then it gives an opportunity for the populists to exploit that. Now, I think this picture is quite revealing, and it may give you an idea how we got to this point. Now, right now, proportion of foreign-born in the US population is 14%. Actually, now in some European countries, it's much higher than that in some of them, you know. So, and then we see the similar anti-immigrant movements, populist movements there as well. Now, 14%, if you include US-born children of those immigrants, the proportion goes to 28%, okay? Now, we arrived to that point from 4.7% in 1970, you know. I'll tell you why. You know, there was in 1965 change in the law. It came to that level, but it was about the same level about a century ago. You know, at the end of the 19th century and beginning of the 20th century, proportion of foreign-born were 15%, okay? And it resulted not only more foreign-born in the US population, but a lot of them were Catholics, you know. Initially, the immigrants to the United States came from Western and Northern Europe, but towards the end of 19th century and beginning of 20th century, there was enormous immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe, you know, from Poland, from Italy, Hungary, you know, Austria, and these were mostly Catholic countries. So the proportion of Catholics in the US population rose to 17% from 5% in 1850. And that created anti-Catholic movements, all these populist parties and so on, very similar to anti-Latino movements now, anti-Muslim movements in Europe. So that comes with not only foreign-born increasing in the population, but those foreign-born being different from the natives in terms of race and culture and religion, language, you know, that's what happens. Now, at that time, they put very racist, restrictive laws into practice. First of all, immigration from all of Asia, you know, from China, from India, including Middle East, was totally banned. And that remained in effect until 1952. No Asians could come except from Russia. Now, apart from that, they put a quota system to restrict immigration from Southern and Eastern Europe. So what they did is they based the quotas on 1890. Whatever is the proportion of people from that country in the United States in 1890, immigrants could not exceed 2% of that, you know. So with those restrictions, number of foreign or proportion of foreign born decreased quite a bit to 4.7%. And in 1965, they lifted the quota system. And then a lot of people start coming from other parts of the world. So that 4.7% became 14% now. Now, the people who arrived in the United States since 1965, about half of it is from Latin America, half of it. And 1/4 of it, a quarter of it, is from Asia. So there are very few whites coming, Europeans coming. Now look at the population. It's very eye-opening. In 1960, whites made up 85% of US. Hispanics, it was 5%, 6-fold increase. And Asians was 0.5%, now it's about 6%. Okay? And that creates a friction. And it also gives the feeling to natives in rural areas and so on, that not only they have gone down in economic status, they also feel like being surrounded by alien cultures. And populists can easily make the immigrants the scapegoat. Actually, the Indian guy who works in Silicon Valley cannot be replaced by less than college educated native rural person, but they don't see it that way. They see this guy just arrived and he's my boss and he's making more money. And Trump was very successful in exploiting this and making the immigrants the culprits for the decline in the economic status of most of the population. Now, to put it all together, I'm going to use the elephant curve. I'm sure many of you are familiar with the elephant curve of Milanovich. It really brings this demographics, income inequality, and populism together. Now, let me explain for those who are not familiar with this. This treats as if the whole world is one country. On the horizontal axis, you see income groups, different income groups, from the poorest to the richest. On the vertical axis, it's not income. It is change in the income, rate of change in the income, okay? So now what do we see in this picture? It looks like an elephant, that's why it's called elephant curve. It looks like an elephant with the trunk raised. Now, who did not do well, who did do well in this? Most of the developing countries, in China, in India, in Turkey, in Northern Africa, those countries did improve their income levels considerably. Now, I'm not saying they are richer than Americans, but they are catching up. So they improved their situation. Another group which improved their well-being is at the tip of the trunk. Those are the top 1% of the world's income group. They're talking about Soros and Tata and Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, people like that. Now, who did not do very well? Stagnated. Well, the poorest of the poor in Africa, the very low end, the lowest 5%, they did not improve their situation. And middle class and lower middle class in Europe and in United States, they stagnated. They remained at their place. Now, on this graph, Milanovich's graph, it looks they have even went below, it's like negative. But actually, they did updates on this graph because there was 2008 crisis. When they update them, this the beginning of the trunk comes up a little bit, not too much. So it's not negative, but about zero. So there are two groups who did not benefit. The poorest of the poor, but these Americans, don't get the wrong idea. I'm not saying Americans are poorer now than Chinese. Actually, let me show you this graph. It just means they are catching up. The Chinese 8th decile is catching up with the US 2nd decile, So the gap is closing. Their incomes are improving, whereas in the United States, they stay put. Now, what happens then? Now, it creates two types of populism, left and right populism. Like people like Trump, they show the back of the elephant. They show the Chinese and the Indians, to American middle class. They say the reason you are poor is because of these guys and immigrants coming from those countries. So I'm going to protect you by putting tariffs, stopping foreign trade with them, you know, pulling out of international spheres and become more isolationist. They are doing right populism, okay? But there's the left populism too, like people like Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren. They are showing to the middle class, to the people who have not improved their situation, the tip of the trunk, the top 1%. And then they say, occupy Wall Street. They say the rich got richer and you did not improve your situation. Relatively speaking, you lost ground, and they are making left populism. And the conditions are such that I show you the historical graphs. It's not something that can change in the short run. So those cleavages remain, and there will be left and right populists emerging all the time. So we are not done with Trump. You know, even if it's not Trump, somebody like him can emerge. The conditions are ripe. The field is there. You only need a seed to drop there. So this is sort of what I wanted to say. So maybe I can answer your questions. So, you know, we finished earlier than I told Professor Ben Youssef that I won't take up the whole time, leave some time for the questions.
Thank you, Professor. If you have any question, you can answer. Okay. Professor, I think you can open at the bottom of your screen the chat room. You have a question from Anas Larej. Do you see?
How do I see that?
In the chat, you know, at the bottom of your screen, you have the bottom chat.
Well, because I have the PowerPoint, I don't see
okay.
it.
So maybe I think you can close it.
You can read it to me, maybe.
Okay. Or maybe I can.
Or the person can ask.
Anas, yeah, of course.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for your presentation. I have one question. As I followed both 2016 and the 2020 elections, and as you said that Trump is a populist, I would like to know how you can explain the fact that a billionaire wins the heart of the Laborian class.
Yeah,
even if he is not one of them.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. I thought about that too. Now, usually the populist emerges from within the group they claim to represent. Now, when that's not the case, you try very hard not to look different. You know, so how do you do that? You use the same language. You are crass with your language and using insulting terms. And he also creates an image for himself. Now we know that's not true, but he created the image in 2016 that he made his own money. I mean, his father gave him very little money, and then he increased it with his talent and so on. You know, so. But we now know that that's not the case. He was given a lot of money by his parents. And that's a good question. I don't have a full answer, but I think he made an effort to make himself look like part of that group and self-made billionaire. It's not like he inherited it. He made it look like he did not inherit it, but we know that he did. I don't know whether that's a good answer to you, but that's how I can explain.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, Professor Akarca. Do you please could explain us the concept of populism? It's a cultural concept, economic concept, or a social concept?
Okay, well, I don't know whether you have my email address. Let me give you that first. Akarca, my last name, @uic.edu. If you send me, any of you, I can send you an articles on that. But let me tell you that I think there is not one type of populism. There is three types of populism: economic populism, political populism, and cultural populism. Today, what I talk to you is the most relevant one for the case. It's the cultural populism. But there is political populism too, which is, Trump has a little bit of that, which is that's authoritarian, anti-institutions. So in the United States, those institutions are very well rooted. So they, if not all, they stopped most of the Trump's decisions, like courts and legislative branch. They were able to stop him. But in other countries, like in Hungary or in Turkey or other places, when they come to power, they also try to control the institutions, diminish them, or get rid of them, or ignore them. That's political populism. And there is economic populism too. Like before each election, you increase government transfers and so on. They call that economic populism.
Okay, thank you.
You can do it only temporarily because you are increasing expenditures and transfers. That will be detrimental to the over long run growth. So you do it for a short period of time. In the long run, that can cause disaster. It can only be done that way in countries which have enormous natural resources, like in Saudi Arabia or United Arab Emirates. You can give people, transfer them money and so on, and finance it through petroleum. But even in that case, you have to be very careful. You don't ostracize groups which buy your exports, or they give you technology to produce them. Otherwise, you end up like Iran or Venezuela. They put sanctions on you, even though you have a lot of resources, you cannot sell them or extract them, and face consequences like what's happening in Venezuela, for example. You know, so it is, short answer to your question is, there is three types of populism. It's not just one concept. It is cultural, political, and economic. And some leaders do all three, some do just two. You know.
And in the American case, the population is of what types?
Well, in the US, it is cultural populism mostly, and political populism, like Trump tried to get out of World Health Organization and get out of foreign agreements and so on. But even though he wants to do political populism too, they don't allow him, you know. So even now he's saying, I'm not going to give up power. That's political populism. If this was not United States, but you know, a country where institutions were not strong, and he may very well remain in power, you know, and that would be political populism. He tries to do political populism, but he's unable to.
Okay. If we make a comparison between Europe and the United States about populism also, what do you think, Prof?
Well, in Europe, in many countries, you have populist leaders, more so than United States, you know, like Le Pen and Wilders in Holland and so on. Now, in some countries, they are in power. I can show you a graph, but there is about 20 countries which are ruled either totally by populists or populists are in the government, you know. So in Europe, populism is on the rise because I told you in the United States, the immigrants, let me show you, what takes 10 years, like the proportion of foreign born rose from 1970 to now quite a bit, but what took 1% increase, 1% increase in the United States takes about 10 years. In Europe, that occurred within 1 year. So there was immediately a big influx of foreign population in those countries. It triggered populists to take advantage of that. So in Europe, the situation is more acute because the change in demographics occurred much faster than in the United States even. You know, and those people are very alien to for the local population. In the United States, there's always immigrants and people, it's a melting pot and so on, so they can digest it much easily, whereas in Europe, they were not used to this kind of thing. So, and
Another question, Professor.
Yeah, sure.
What is the relationship between financial crisis and populism? Inequality and financial crisis, inequality and populism.
Well, as I told you, if there is immigrants coming, but your economic condition is improving, you don't make much issue out of it. But if your economic condition is suffering and somebody comes and tells you the reason is all these foreigners coming, taking your jobs, or Chinese producing cheaper, or US manufacturers moving jobs to Mexico, and so on, then you start believing that, then populists have the upper hand. Like, I'll give you an example. When Trump first became president, there was this factory in Wisconsin making, I think, air conditioners, and they were about to move to Mexico because it's easier, cheaper to produce there. So Trump made a big issue out of it, tried to make an example out of them, and told them, if you move there, I'm going to put tariffs and I'm going to make your life miserable and so on. So the company said, okay, we are not moving. We gave up. And he heralded as a victory. He says, this is the way to go about it. And populists were very happy and so on. But actually, that company, I don't know the exact number, but they had about 2,000 workers to be fired. They still fired all of them. They only kept 200 of them. And now they used robotics to produce them. They used more robots. So the issue is, if your skills are not improved, if you are still less than college education, then either you are not competing with the Chinese worker. If the Chinese worker is not allowed to produce, then robots produce. Then you become substitute for a robot. So if there is a crisis, if the inequality is not there, then it's easier for the populists to take advantage of the situation, exploit the situation.
Okay. Do you think that the COVID crisis has an impact in the election results?
Yeah, it does. Initially people could not understand. For example, when Trump was a candidate in 2016, and he called Mexican immigrants rapists and murderers and thieves and so on, people thought he's going to apologize soon, and he didn't apologize. He doubled down and he said even worse things, and people couldn't understand because he was doing exactly what a populist would do. People were not used to it. Now with the corona, the same thing. When he said don't use masks, don't close the economy, and so on, people said, this is ridiculous. What kind of thing is this? People are going to turn against him. But actually, not everybody can work from home using Zoom, right? I mean, if you are a barber, if you are a farmer, if you are a bartender, if you are a waiter, you cannot work from home. So in the rural communities, the cost-benefit ratio is different. You are faced with risking yourself, but when you wear a mask or when you lock yourself at home, the benefit is less than in urban area, but the cost is far more than in urban area. Again, Trump used that to his benefit. He told these people, we'll take a small risk and we won't lock down the economy and you won't suffer as much. So most people thought this will turn against him, and it didn't, as we saw in the results.
Okay, thank you,
so
Professor.
We need to understand the populists much better,
We have two more questions for you.
Sure. Yes. Hello?
Yes, we hear you, Henry.
Yes, my question is the following to the professor. How did you see the issue by now as we are going to run a new term with Biden, but nevertheless, we will be under the idea, believe true or not, that the practice of a massive vote through the mailing procedures is definitely including a suspicion.
I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
While a vote by an actual physical presence is fully clean and cannot be contested. What I'm afraid is that with the modern practice, the mailing procedures will be used, will continue to be used more and more, and I'm afraid that could work against the democracy. So what do you think?
Well, you know, in America, they have a saying, they say, if ain't broke, don't fix it. So there is no history, there is no example, there is no case of election being affected by voter fraud, okay? Now, many people think maybe in Europe that mail-in voting is something new. It's not.
No, I'm not saying it's new. I'm saying that with the pandemic, it has been bigger than in the past, and with the new technology, we will be stimulated to use this practice, which I believe it's not as sincere as a voter going by himself physically and putting his ballot, you know.
Right,
and,
right. Yeah,
but specifically by the mailing through the computer, you know. And
yeah.
But I'm not saying that it was fraud. I'm saying that
it can be a problem.
You know, that could be a problem. That could work against the democracy idea, I believe.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm not an expert on these voting techniques.
Neither.
Computer experts will have to come. Right now, you know, it's not just mail-in vote. They compare your signature to the original, and the loser has a right to object, and then they check it one more time. You know, the paper ballots, they count them. But you are right. I mean, the potential is there that somebody may abuse it, but so far it has not happened, and Trump was not able to prove any.
No, I'm not talking about the. I'm not talking about the audit procedures, which has been, I believe, follow with a lot of which was strictly followed.
Sure.
However, you know, I'm just afraid about this high technology which push people not to move from their home and to send their ballot by mailing, which does not mean the same thing, you know. And
of course, that's a problem.
They could be influenced. They could be done by another person, the son or the neighbor, you know. And it's not the same meaning. Here in France, we only accept to do it by exception. In other words, if you can't move because you are sick or because you are traveling somewhere else overseas, there you are authorized to send by mailing. But otherwise, you know, you move your body and put your bloody vote, and that means something more than just sending something by the mail, you know.
Yeah, well, I agree with you. There are problems. I mean, I'm not an expert on that, so I won't say much. Not only there is that problem that you mentioned, there is also the problem of foreign countries intervening, you know, affecting the results, and there is potentially a lot of problems, like you said. I agree, and maybe experts should work harder and make technology safer. You know, I don't know the answer to that question. It's a concern.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor. We have another interesting question. What Biden's victory means for China and Iran?
Could you say that again?
What Biden's victory means for China and Iran?
Oh, well, I don't know, but probably a friendly relation. But I mean, I think with Iran, probably they will reach another agreement, but he won't. I don't think he will simply go back to the original agreement. He would use some of the things Trump changed as a leverage to get maybe slightly better deal than the one negotiated under Obama administration. With the China, the same way. I mean, now there is tariffs. Maybe they will get. Then Trump is not going to disappear. He will be there, and he will exploit that and say, "See, they are giving in," and so on. So probably relations would improve a little bit, but he will try to get some concessions before reaching an overall agreement. You know, but competition between China and problems with China did not start with Trump. It was started earlier, so those frictions will still continue, I think. Again, I'm not a foreign policy expert, but that's my take on it.
Thank you, Professor. I don't see any other questions.
I have a question.
Please.
Hi, Professor.
Hi.
You said at the beginning that Trump lost because more people voted.
Could you speak a little bit louder? I cannot hear.
Yeah. You said at the beginning that Trump lost because more people voted this time, especially Black people and
Right.
Latinos. And I wanted to know if, in your opinion, that happened because of Trump's behavior during his mandate and what happened in the country during this time, Black Lives Matter and all of that.
I'm unable to understand. What happened to what?
What happened during this time, during the election, you know.
You mean why people voted more?
Yeah, like the protest and Black Lives Matter, and Trump's responses were not good enough for people, so they voted him out. Do you think that's the reason? One of the
well, sometimes very small changes at the bottom create big changes at the top. This is the case here. It could easily go the other way around, even though like Hillary Clinton, Biden could have won by plurality, but still lose the electoral college. A few states he won by small margin. If it could go the other way around, then Trump would be elected. So because of the U.S. electoral system, which gives more weight to rural districts than states than the urban ones. Now, of course, the Black Lives Matter and the racist attitudes of Trump and so on galvanize the blacks. So they come in larger proportions to vote than before. So that was a big difference, I think.